Good afternoon, everybody. Google filtering in. I'll give everyone a second. I'm Sam Roy, and I'm the Marketing and Operations Manager at RXinsider, and I will be your host today for our first webinar of 2023. And today I am joined by another Sam Balter, so Sam squared today. Sam is the Director of Media Content at ZoomInfo and an award-winning podcast host of Weird Work. I attended a session hosted by Sam this fall, and I loved it. So I wanted to share his words with you. I even started quoting it. I don't Google, I TikTok. So more on that. But how are you doing today, Sam?
I'm doing great. I was just horribly sick and now recovered and feeling fantastic. So very happy to be here.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad you recovered. I'm super excited to hear more about successful media content as we all begin our marketing plans for 2023. Just a quick reminders before we get started, the Q&A and the chat are open, so feel free to throw questions, comments in there. We'll be monitoring that throughout, and then we should be able to get to some questions at the end. So without further ado, I'll let you take it away, Sam.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And okay, so let's see here. So today I want to talk about media content for B2B, and I'll run through some kind of goals, like how to think about goal setting, team organization, and a little bit towards the end on process. So just as a kind of further introduction for anybody who missed it, my name is Sam Balter. I'm the Director of Media Content at ZoomInfo. Previously, I handled podcast marketing and demand gen at HubSpot. And as Sam mentioned, I'm the host of award-winning podcast, Weird Work, which I encourage everybody to go download and listen to. And you can also find me on Twitter at SBBalter. So for today's presentation, I'd like to keep this pretty casual. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, or if anything comes up, feel free to just drop it in the chat and I'll try to answer it either during the presentation or towards the end, whichever kind of makes the most sense, but please don't hesitate to just toss in anything you have as a question. So I want to kick this presentation off with a little story about an elevator. So I hope that everybody can just sort of place themselves in kind of this old building in New York City, and there's this elevator. It's busted, it's slow, it's terrible. And all of the people who live in this building are frustrated with this elevator, and management is starting to get nervous. So the management goes to this engineering consultant and they say, we need to fix this elevator. It's too slow. The engineers come back and they say, look, you're going to need to rip out this elevator. You're going to need to put a second one in. It's going to be extremely expensive and it's going to take forever. Management says, no, we absolutely cannot do that. So they bring in a second consultant. The second consultant says, okay, look, the elevator, it's terrible. Now, the problem though, is people need to feel like being part of this building is something special. They need to feel like this is a strong community and place to be. So you should be hosting events for people. You should consider lowering people's rent a little bit. You should be considering working with them and throwing parties and things like that to make it feel really special. Management is like, no, we're not going to lower rent. We don't have the money for this. This is not necessarily what we want to do. Then finally, they come to this third consultant. And the third consultant says, your elevator is fine. There's no issues with your elevator. The problem is that people have a bad perception. It's a perception problem. And he says, I have a solution. Just give me the weekend and I will fix it. And now this consultant comes up with a solution that is ubiquitous to all elevators in pretty much every single hotel around the world. Maybe you could toss it in the chat if you feel like it or anything like that. But this, if you know what this solution is. The solution is mirrors. The problem is that people didn't necessarily have a problem that the elevator was too slow. They just didn't have anything to do while they were waiting for the elevator. So what you do is you put in this mirror, and now people can look at themselves, they can check themselves out, they can see how they're doing, and the time flies by. The reason I bring up this story is so often marketers are faced with all of these difficult things, large problems to solve. And sometimes the solution isn't about fixing the underlying problem, but necessarily fixing people's perception of that problem. And sometimes the solution isn't always this big, complicated, expensive thing. It's more of a minor change. So I believe that marketing really has two jobs. Our job is to increase awareness of the brand or companies we support and shift people's perception. And I think when we think about marketers' job being to shift the perception of a brand, and consumer perceptions are shaped way before they reach your website, right? So if you're not doing things to get in front of people before they reach your website, you're not doing a core part of your job, which is to shift people's perceptions. And that's what media content comes in. Media content helps shape consumer perspectives. So today I want to talk about why media content and metrics that are important, and then that process for creating media content. So first off, I just want to say to anybody working in content marketing, it is really, really hard. First off, the main way we focused as content marketers is to work towards search engines. But search engines are increasingly costly, right? There are huge amounts of the real estate on a search engine is taken up by paid ads. The other thing to think about is out of all of the traffic that goes through and of somebody actually, searching something in Google, over half of searches end without anyone clicking on anything. And how can that be possible? Well, SEO is competitive, and it's not just competitive in that you're competing against your competitors, you're also competing against Google. So if you're out there and you're looking at something like the topic of inbound marketing, HubSpot's a company that pretty much pioneered that concept, but they're really competing. Here they are up at the top. There's Marketo and Salesforce, all fighting them for the same thing. Here's Google redirecting them in a number of different ways to different questions that they now have to rank for. Here they are creating featured snippets on the side. And even on this one, you could see that Marketo here is the featured snippet, right? So SEO is competitive, not only from a cost perspective against ads, but also you're competing against Google. This makes it really, really difficult to rely strictly on Google or search engines as your primary view of content marketing. But I would postulate that this isn't really the big issue. The big issue is that how people conduct research is changing. And that's why I want to bring up this short example here that I saw a while ago from Turner Novak. So I'm just going to play a quick clip here that I saw on social. Goes like this.
I don't Google anymore, I TikTok. I want to buy a new face mist, a new face product, TikTok. Not sure how to cook something, TikTok. Why would I Google something? And I can go on TikTok, watch a 15-second video, gives me the full lowdown on how to make something, if something's good, how to use something. I get a little visual of it, and it's literally so easy. Please tell me I'm not the only one.
So I think this video is really interesting. Not only because I saw this video on Twitter from somebody that I follow. So I started looking into this. Okay, this seems like a really interesting idea. I don't Google anymore, I TikTok. So I went to figure out who this person was. And she is not, shockingly, somebody working in content marketing or anything like that. She's predominantly a beauty influencer. So I actually went to TikTok to figure out this more. I don't Google anymore, I TikTok. So I treated TikTok like Google. And I started getting all these interesting results. Okay, now I'm going to keep digging into these. I'm going to learn a little bit more about this conversation that's going on around I don't Google anymore, I TikTok. So obviously, when I see these search results, which one do I go for? The top right one, which has an enormous amount of views. So I just go here. Oh, geez. I'm sorry, there's no sound for that video. Slight minor technical difficulties. So I'll just have to go through and give without sound. Basically, she's saying that TikTok is replacing Google, that she's not going to Google anymore to use it for searching anything, searching news, searching things that are going on in the world, searching anything along those lines. Everything that they're doing is through TikTok. I continued down this rabbit hole even more. And so I followed this other video. This person goes through and starts talking about how important TikTok is. He says, I don't Google anymore, I also TikTok. And he explains that Google is an area where you can pay to get at top, whereas TikTok is an area where the best content rises to the top. So people have more inherent trust. And he specifically calls out this tweet by Claude Lucas. So I ended up following this along even more. I went to this Claude Lucas tweet and I started going into more detail on it. I don't Google anymore, I TikTok. Now, I think that this is really interesting because you can see here, he's mostly like a designer talking about design things. And then he has this one tweet that really hits a thread and goes viral. I don't Google anymore, I TikTok. So now we have all of a sudden 121,000 things. And so I started looking at this and I started thinking like, okay, well, what are people saying on Twitter? Twitter, a lot of replies to this. People are saying things like, I learned more on TikTok than I have on school. The amount that I've learned at TikTok University is insane. There's sort of counter arguments on the other side. There's way too much misinformation on there. There's other people saying this is how misinformation starts. Other people agreeing. Other people are sad. Right. So there's a lot of different things going on here when you start looking at the replies for all of these different videos and start thinking about what people are saying. So when I think about this situation, I would say that how to solve a problem is shifting from searching for an authority to seeing what people are saying. Right? It's more about the general conversation around the topic than it is necessarily for looking for somebody who's the absolute authority on that topic. And so I think one of the things you can see about this is when I think about how it kind of breaks down, it's not just where people search that's changing, but the process as well. The other thing to keep in mind is research occurs across platforms, formats, and creators. Somebody within my Twitter network shared something from TikTok that they saw, which led me to find other TikToks on TikTok, which sent me back to Twitter to find the original tweet that this was about. So you can see that the research that an individual has, me looking at the specific I don't Google, I TikTok trend, is really important because you can see that a research is occurring across multiple platforms, formats, and creators. It is no longer just this totally linear journey where somebody has a question and they immediately type it into Google. Now they're starting to type their questions, their concerns, and things they want to know more about into the platforms and social networks that they spend the most time. The other thing I would say is that comments are essential for developing an opinion on a topic, right? In a way that like you just don't really see anymore with blogs or other things. People are talking about, oh, leave what you think in the comments. What are people saying about this? How can we add to this conversation, right? It becomes much of a broader conversation. And in order to do that, comments are essential. So I think when you're thinking about this as a social media manager or a content creator or something like that, you almost want to be putting as much time into thinking about how you are going to generate comments and how you're going to reply to those comments as you do in terms of thinking about the content itself. The last thing I would say is this process is kind of fun. The new research process and the new way that people are learning about things is just more fun than the traditional plugging things into Google, seeing what the top result is, and reading through that information. It's a lot more fun to watch short videos and interactive media comments and read people's hot takes right there in the same system than to be going through a long blog post that is necessarily geared towards SEO. And I think the process being kind of fun is essential, because if you don't think about making it entertaining, if you don't think about making this fun, if you don't think about making it digestible, then you're necessarily going to lose out in the end. And I think when you think about how this has shifted, like, it has also significantly shifted where marketer priorities are. So this is some data from HubSpot Marketing Trends Report. You can see that social media is topping out all other channels as the top marketing channel. Social media is where I could go over blogs, email marketing, content marketing, influencer marketing, and it is nearly double in terms of SEO marketing. People are really considering social as the most important channel and then bringing those insights into other channels, versus as a lot of what you see kind of traditionally, where somebody kind of writes a piece of content and then posts it on social. It's really important to think about your social media strategy first. So when I think about what that means for media content, it's really media content is meant to be consumed off of your website. And I think that's the best way to think about it. It's just content that is meant to be consumed off-site. And I think this is really hard for a lot of people in marketing, because businesses really want you to visit their website. People want to send you to the website because they have a prescribed flow of like, oh, somebody's going to go on a website, read a blog post, fill out a form, become a lead. But people don't necessarily want to do that. They might just want to get all of the information they have on social or on TikTok or on LinkedIn or on Instagram. So when I think about media content, you should think about it as social first. Thinking about social instead of just being the last part of your process, thinking about if we were to do this content in a way that was really, really good for social, that optimized for entertainment, that optimized for questions, how would we do that? This is another example, and this is a lot of where I'm drawing a good inspiration from. I saw this post from the VP of marketing at Spartoro on LinkedIn. So as you can see in the LinkedIn post, she actually highlights a Twitter thread she has. So it says, it's a tough world out there for creators. Over half of Google searches end without a click, and social media platforms ding you for linking out. What to do? Beat the platforms at their own game, make zero-click content, here's how. So I saw this on LinkedIn, and I could tell that it was a post from Twitter. And so then I went over to Twitter to find out more. I started looking through this and getting a little bit more information about what Amanda meant by zero-click content. It offers valuable standalone insights with no need to click, right? So she starts giving examples: Twitter threads, 60-second TikToks, 200-word LinkedIn post. Stuff that's easily consumed by anyone scrolling their feed, yet still provides value. Now, here's the thing. There's trade-offs with zero-click content, right? Tracking ROI on a specific piece of content does become harder. So you have to kind of change your mindset a little bit. You know, you have to be thinking about, how do we get people to engage with this content? How do we get people to leave comments on it? How do we get people to do something more interesting with it or share it? But the counterintuitive nature of this zero-click content is when you create content that's so valuable that it doesn't need to be consumed off-platform, you're actually more likely to get people to smash that CTA. So when I got to the end of Amanda's thread, what do you think I did? I went ahead and smashed that CTA and went to a blog post where she went into more depth on zero-click content. And I want to really call out this one graphic. Now, one of the things that's a big issue when you're posting content on LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube or anything like that is that when you add a link that goes from LinkedIn to YouTube or from LinkedIn to your website or from Twitter to your website, the algorithm is going to deprioritize you. It's going to prioritize native content, so content that doesn't necessarily link out. So if you're sitting here and looking at this list, you might be a little bit worried if your primary kind of content strategy is to post links to content you've written on Google or not on Google, on LinkedIn or on Twitter, on things like that. So basically, every single major platform is going to deprioritize your content and give it less reach if it uses a link that links off-site. There's some ways you can get around this by saying things like link in comments, but obviously it does change your strategy knowing that the algorithm is going to prioritize native content and is going to penalize you for sending out links. So I was really fascinated by this, and I wanted to just have this case study, my own experience. In the course of a year, ZoomInfo focused on posting less frequently with content that was tailored more to LinkedIn and Twitter. So think about things like longer Twitter threads, 200-word LinkedIn posts, things like that. It takes a lot of work to do these things. So we ended up doing about half the number of posts. We cut the number of total posts we were doing in half. We ended up generating over that period of times 3 times increase in total engagements and a 2 times increase in web traffic. So think about that. We did half the number of posts, got 3 times more total engagements and 2 times more increases in web traffic. We also saw an acceleration of our follower growth rate. And we also saw acceleration in other areas of the business like ACV generated from, or annual contract value generated through social. So the reason I bring this up is not just to say that you need to necessarily post half as much or cut down your posting totally, but it's worth spending significantly more time per each post in order to increase the amount of engagements you're getting and thereby increase the amount of web traffic you get. Now, when I think about the kind of observations overall, it's creating successful media content requires prioritizing offsite consumption. And this is kind of antithetical to your traditional content playbooks, which your end goal is to get somebody to your website. So what I would say is that when you're trying to create this content, every network is unique in its tone, style, and performance. Too often in social, people are creating a piece of content and they'll take, let's say it's a blog post, they might take the first line of the blog post and they'll use that as the heading for LinkedIn, for Twitter, for Facebook, and for Instagram. Even though every single one of those networks is different in terms of the tone and the style, right? There's no such thing as Twitter threads on LinkedIn. You have to make adjustments for everything, and it takes a lot of work to do that. When you're doing cross-network promotion, it should appear as native to that network. So a LinkedIn post should share Twitter screenshots. It seems sort of almost like counterintuitive, like why would you do that? But we've just seen generally that that works really well. When you're going to showcase something that was successful on one network on another, show it in its native format. The CTA, the call to action, should be based around generating engagement and not web traffic. That's why in a lot of videos for TikTok and a lot of things for Instagram, if you look at what a lot of influencers do when they create content, they're often telling people like, oh, what do you think? Post what you think in the comments. Do you agree or disagree? Is this something that does this resonate with you? Is there another thing you would add to this? Right? All of those things are really important because every time you make the call to action engagement, that increases the reach of your post. And every time somebody comments, that gives you another opportunity to basically comment back and engage with that to keep the dialogue going. Every single comment, every single reply, and every single like on those replies is just additional engagement. And if you remember, there's sort of a really close tie between the amount of engagement you're getting and the amount of like kind of total web traffic that's going to come from social media. The last thing I would just say is like, from my experience, it means a lot more work needs to go into each post. I was shocked how long it took me to write Twitter threads, right? I spent over an hour and a half writing like one Twitter thread. And I think people need to get used to, if you're going to write zero-click content, you almost need to be taking it as just as much work into creating that content as you did into the blog post. That's why for a lot of companies, I kind of do recommend reducing the amount of post volume so that you have the bandwidth to focus more time on each individual post. So now the metrics for media content, how to measure this success. So a lot of people wonder about measurement, and I break it down into kind of 3 categories that I pay attention to. There's thousands and thousands of metrics and rates and all sorts of things with social, but these are the main ones that I look at: followers, engagement, and referral traffic. So for followers, I think about your audience as an asset, right? Audience numbers rarely fluctuate hugely. They're the best asset you have, and the larger your follower count, the stronger every piece of content coming out of it will be. So you got to ask yourself, when you're looking at followers, which platform is growing the quickest? Are you getting more followers from Facebook than you are on Instagram? Are you getting a lot of new followers and that rate of growth is really increasing on TikTok? Is the rate of growth increasing month over month? Right? If you're starting to do content really well, you'll notice that you're picking up more and more followers each month. Are you growing your audience as fast as your competitors? So this is something where it's like, are you growing your audience a lot faster than your competitors are? And somebody just asked a question, do you have an example of Twitter post like the one you spent 1.5 hours to develop? Yeah, I'm happy to share like a post that it took me an hour and a half to develop. Some of them are like on product ones, but I can kind of walk through one at the end if that would be helpful. Engagement. So engagement measures if your audience likes what you're doing. So are total engagements per month increasing year over year? Is engagement per post going up? And how does this vary by type of post? And is engagement per follower getting better? Right. So I think a lot of things is like you want to be looking at the total amount of engagements, but you also want to be looking at the amount of engagements relative to each post, and then the amount of engagements relative to your follower count. So if your follower count is growing, but your engagements are not, there's definitely an issue there with who you're bringing in as new followers. So you can see sort of the disconnects if there's an issue. And the last thing is referral traffic. Referral traffic is what turns into money, new hires, and press coverages. And the question you should be asking is, are you organically increasing referral traffic to your website? What channels like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram sends traffic to where? And does that traffic turn into money, right? Like, are you turning traffic into actual money? So if you can track those things, it's hugely helpful. But I think at a top level, you should just be looking at how much traffic comes from LinkedIn, how much traffic comes from Facebook, how much traffic goes to Instagram, and on what page do they end up with. I think a lot of the times people underestimate how important social is in terms of hiring. I think that you'll underestimate how much it is in terms of press coverages or analyst coverage as well. Now, the last thing I kind of want to run through here is talking a little bit about producing media content. And I would say this with limited resources, because I think in a lot of ways, we would all ideally love to produce tons and tons of media content, but we often all kind of have less resources than we'd like. So when I think about what my team is responsible for, we have to write a ton of captions for social posts. We have to do social media analytics. We have to work with stakeholders in product, in HR, in content, with exec stakeholders. And anyone at the company who has an idea on like what would be cool on social, we usually have to work with them to some degree. This usually involves designing simple images, simple GIFs, maybe record a podcast, produce some simple videos, produce some animations. And usually by simple, most people mean high production work. We need to work with influencers, monitor and respond to all mentions, also employee advocacy if that's possible, and more social media analytics. So the amount of work to be done by a team could be really, really overwhelming here. So one thing I'd want to do is I'd recommend people kind of break this into an exercise. So this exercise is one that I do is I kind of categorize all the different post types we have into some really basic categories. So something like company announcements, product updates, events, content, employer brand. Then I try and get everything figured out for the number of engagements per each post on average. So company announcements are usually big news, 50 engagements, product updates, not as many people, might be 10, events, 20, something like that. And then I look at the frequency of those posts per month, right? And so then I take the number of engagements per month and the frequency per month to get a sense of how many total engagements are coming from that type of content. Now, this is where things get really interesting. If I'm looking for where do I focus my area, where do I focus? I should really be investing the most time in making the most frequent things better. They generate the most engagements per month. And adding a minor improvement on, say, something like content is going to have a lot larger of an impact than, say, improving a company announcement, simply because we just do it a lot more frequently. So I think for every brand or company out there, this is a good quick exercise to help you identify areas of focus. Where should you be investing that time? Where should you consider cutting down the post frequency in order to increase the engagements per post? And can you get that to increase the total engagements per month? So I would just say focus where you can repeat and improve quickly. So what you should do is anything you could do to serialize repetitive content is going to be really helpful. This is a quick aside I want to make about kind of making serialized content. This is from an interview from Harvard Business Review with Jerry Seinfeld. So the interviewer says, you and Larry David wrote Seinfeld together without a traditional writer's room, and burnout was one of the reasons you stopped. Was there a more sustainable way to do it? Could McKinsey or someone have helped you find a better model? He said, who's McKinsey? They said, it's a consulting firm. He said, are they funny? They said, no. And he said, then I don't need them. If you're efficient, you're doing it the wrong way. The right way is the hard way. The show was successful because I micromanaged it. Every word, every line, every take, every edit, every casting, that's my way of life. Now, I bring this up because oftentimes in marketing, people talk about scaling, and they get really excited about the idea of everything being able to be quickly scaled, to be built up. But the truth is you need to be able to iterate on things over and over again. You need to get into the details of them. But you also need to limit and kind of put some guardrails around yourself so that it doesn't become completely out of control. This is all just to say that the creative process itself can be really confusing and really difficult. But production and getting things out there needs to happen pretty quickly. So you have these two competing priorities. You have compelling creative stuff that takes a while, is hard, invested in a lot of effort, balancing that with timely content, getting something out there quickly. So when I think about ZoomInfo from my own experience, like we've created some series here that put some guardrails around it, and then all of a sudden we make updates each and every time. So we have these particular videos from our founder called In Your Corner, where we run a system where he goes through these short, under 5-minute demos covering major things. We want to share stories that are relevant to sales, so we built a podcast that does just that. We want to be able to talk about playbooks and how to run plays, so we use these ZI labs and have specific branding. And then we have things like What's New or What's the Scoop as quick series that iterate each month. And if you look at something like a What's New video at ZoomInfo, the first one, not that great. The second one, better. The third one, better. The fourth one, even better than that. So I don't think you should look at a series as something that needs to be fully realized immediately, but it's an iterative process. Each episode, each version needs to be slightly better than the last one. So you need to be taking time to look at what worked in this episode, what worked in this one, and what can we do to improve. So I would say that creating media content is difficult. It requires a lot of time, observation, and repetition in order to continuously improve. Creating series is a helpful way to make the second version easier than the first version and the third version easier than the second version. Creating series provides more consistent branding of certain types of content, right? So you could do things where you could see, you can limit a lot of the kind of conversations about branding and stuff like that by just investing in a series, and then you're focusing the majority of your time on content and not some of the other things. And then serial content is more predictable when it will be released. I think that's one of the nice kind of side things about serial content is a lot of people are working in social feel like it's a fire hose of information that comes out at them, right? How do I make good content? Somebody has some request that comes in and then you need to respond to it immediately. Whereas serial content generally gives you things like this type of video occurs at the top of every month. This video occurs once a quarter. This type of series comes out on Thursdays. And that type of predictability is not just good for your content marketing, it's just good for people's sanity as well. Gives a lot more kind of control over what people are doing and gives them a lot more ability to create some content on a more regular cadence. The last thing I want to talk about is kind of the team process. So a traditional content process works kind of like this. You have an idea, then you have a rough draft, that rough draft is edited, and then you have a final draft that gets published. When you have a bunch of writers, it works like this. You have 3 different ideas, they all produce rough drafts, they're all in editing, and then they all produce a final draft. And it's really, I mean, that's the way the most kind of traditional content process has worked. Then all of those final drafts for different blog posts will generally go into something like an ebook. And then maybe that ebook will become the basis for 2 videos or something like that. So that's generally what you're seeing. The problem with the traditional content process is that content creators are further away from channels that distribute their content, right? Content is meant to be linked to, even though many social networks penalize it. In the current kind of traditional content process, you have minimal amounts of cross-media collaboration. It's rare that somebody who's working on the video is working super closely with the person who wrote the blog post. And because of the different steps and the way that it works in kind of like a linear process, there's usually long timelines to develop content. And you have these long timelines that might arrive where the best asset you want, the video, is the last thing that you're producing. So this is a way I think about how to divide up work for my team. I think about things about as a patch of grass, where everybody has to have that one sort of thing that they own, the one thing that they're in charge of and they know and that they manage. So let's say we have this person, Mel, and this is Mel's patch of grass. Mel works with 2 other people, Mel and Mike and Matt. So each one of them has their own sort of patch of grass and thing that they work on, and it's their own unique thing. But you need ways and projects where these people are interacting with each other, right? They need to have some overlap of where they own something, somebody else owns something, and they're collaborating together. In an ideal world, as this starts to build out, you have some projects that might be an overlap between Mike and Mel, there are Mike and Matt, and then there are Mike, Mel, and Matt projects that all go together. This is kind of your ideal setup. Now, right now, this looks very, very abstract. But if you go back and you think about all this stuff that I kind of mentioned in the jobs to be done by a media team, you can start to group these things together. So one way you might divide up work is Mel might be in charge of social media campaigns, the coordination of campaigns, the copy around the captions, and making sure everything lines up in terms of timing and assets. Somebody else might be in charge of, Matt might be in charge of thought leadership, and Mike might be in charge of video production. So you might say social media campaigns and thought leadership, they come together to work on executive posting. Social media campaigns and product videos might be where social media campaigns and video production come together, right? There are ways that you could start seeing your own work and saying, does each individual have their own thing that they own? Is there a distinct area where they collaborate with one other person? The thing that you want to generally avoid, and I've seen, is that everybody works on everything. That is not effective. And it's rarely effective to see that level of collaboration. And so like what you want to do is limit the number of collaborators where people own their own thing and then are working together on a distinct project. So what you think of as the more traditional media content, the media content process might look like more like this. You have somebody from social, you have a writer, and you have somebody who produces media, all work together on a single idea. They might script a rough draft of a video because that's the asset that you want to really publish on social, because that's the thing that's going to do best. So the social media, the writer, the media person are all working together on getting that idea into a script and rough draft. And then everybody goes off and takes that initial idea and moves it into their own kind of patch of grass. Social is working on the captions, the writer is working on execs post, and the media person is working on the video and creating different versions of it. Everything goes into a central review so that you ensure we're all working together, and then you publish it. This is kind of a minor, it seems like a minor difference, but it's a huge change in the way the content is produced. And the idea is that you're kind of reducing a number of steps to get to the main asset that you want to post. So I think the advantage to this system is that content creators are a lot closer to the channels that distribute the content, right? They're a lot more tied to the results of the content by basically having fewer steps between them. Ideas are also multi-format. Like I had said in the beginning, the way people research is changing. They're on different platforms, they move from one to another, and it's a mix of hearing it from people within their network as well as from brands. And so a media content is good because it initially already starts out thinking, how is this content going to live in multiple formats? Content is optimized for the channel it lives on, right? So you can see that like, okay, great. If it's on LinkedIn, it's a 200-word post. If it's on Twitter, it's on a Twitter thread. If it's a TikTok, it's a short video. If it's a YouTube short, it's also a short video. If it's a longer YouTube video, if it's a YouTube video, it might be a slightly longer one, around 5 minutes. The other thing is collaboration is essential for a media team. And I think this is a good thing because people who are in marketing like to be creative and they like to collaborate together. So that is basically the summary of kind of moving from a traditional content process to more of a media content process. And with that, I could just pause and take any questions on anything that we've run through. I see I have one in the chat that's, do you have an example of a Twitter post like that you spent 1.5 hours on to develop? Yeah, sure. I could share one in just a second. Let me stop sharing my screen and I'll find one. Awesome. Any other questions while I bring that up?
I have one to kick it off. What do you think the easiest way to measure success in terms of this type of content is?
Yeah, I think in terms of measuring success, to me, it's all just about looking at the engagements on content. Like how much engagement are you getting, and are you getting more than you were getting before? I think that's the easiest way to look at it. And I think it's one of the simplest ways to start. Also, I think engagements have the highest correlation to web traffic and to follower count. So it's kind of like you could think of engagements as sort of like the keystone of other metrics. If engagements are going up and trending in the right directions, it's likely that all the other areas will be going up and trending in the right directions. Cool. Okay, here. And then let me just pop over here. I found a good, I spent an egregious amount of time working on this one. I'll show it to you here. Can you see this? All right, cool. So this is just a simple Twitter thread about G2 Crowd. It's nothing major, but it's like we have an integration between ZoomInfo and G2 Crowd. So this is actually all based off of video, and we want to explain each step. So you can see here, each part of the Twitter thread goes through, and each part is kind of linked out where you could say like, step 1, do this. Next step, you have these, and each one generally ends with a line that kind of leads you into the next tweet. Now that you have a list of best fit accounts, but how do you reach out? So it's taking all of these things and explaining how you do this integration and showing you with GIFs, explains each part of it. And then at the very end, you see this video that it is based off of. It's all drawn from this YouTube video here. But in order to produce this Twitter thread, we had to recut a whole lot of different parts of this video and optimize it for Twitter. So as you can see, this is something we kind of like, in order to get the right text in the right way, make sure that everything led into each other, had the right GIFs, was engaging, that kind of thing took probably over an hour and a half just to produce this one. This is probably likely a 2 or 3 hours, and it does perform in a lot of ways, like 1,507 views. This thread is generally more productive in terms of more views than our normal Twitter threads. So hopefully that's helpful. Does anybody else have any other questions or anything I could help with?
Another question came in from John, says, how do you identify where your customers are social media playing? If you have a product for their work, do you search work, social, or does it come up on other sites inadvertently?
Wait, do you say, wait,
It's in the Q&A.
can you say that one more?
Yep.
Oh, can you say that one more time?
How do you identify where your customers are social media playing? If you have a product for their work, do they search work, social, or does it come up on other sites inadvertently?
Yes. Yeah, there's a dream that your customers are they only live on the platforms that are relevant. That is not true. Everybody is on everything all the time. I think you see a lot of people say, oh, my customers aren't necessarily on Facebook. Oh, my customers aren't on TikTok. They're only on Facebook. You don't know that. I mean, for one thing, they might just not be using TikTok necessarily, but TikTok is picking up that this person works in a particular area or will show things. So I think, like, one, the best way that you can find out if your customers are there is to post a little bit of content and to see how it does, right? Like, it's worth just checking to see if that's it. I mean, a lot of times people will look at the demographics of TikTok or the demographics of different things, but usually that's not fully accurate. So I think a lot of the times I would say the best way to know is if the content does well. If you try a little bit of content there and people are using it, it's worth trying. The other thing is, like, just search it. Just go on, like, if you work in medical devices, just search medical devices on TikTok, see what people are saying. If you work in, like, industrial manufacturing or something like that, just search it on Instagram and see what people are saying. That's the main thing you want to be doing, is you want to look if there's an existing conversation already going on. So I'll give an example for me in terms of sales. Like, a lot of our audience is sales. If I look on TikTok about sales, there's a lot of sales content out there, and it generally falls into two categories. Sales jobs, which is like, how much are people earning in this kind of particular job, and how do I break into a job in tech sales? The other thing people are talking about is short tips on how to be better. Use this type of line versus this other line. So if I'm going to go produce content that's related to sales for TikTok, that's probably where I'm going to focus. Jobs or quick tips for people getting better. So I think that's the important thing, is to look not necessarily at the total numbers or demographics or other things. Just type in the words that you're trying to figure out, see if the conversations on there are relevant, and then see if there's a way that you can get involved in those conversations in a helpful way. Let's see, I got one. Do you know statistically which platforms resonate with different audiences? Pharma, LinkedIn, or pharmacy, Twitter. LinkedIn has the capability to house articles in the platform or on your company page. Is there data behind the performance of directing to your LinkedIn page article versus offsite to your website or blog? Okay, yes. So a couple things there. So which social networks resonate with different audiences? I think you kind of pick up some differences there. Like, in the podcasting world, a lot of podcasters are on Twitter. That seems to be the predominant place that people have conversations. There's some things that you sort of just notice, but I don't know if I've never seen good research that says this industry spends a lot of time here. I think the best way to do it is just looking at the conversation volume. There's a lot of HR professionals on LinkedIn because that's where they spend a lot of their time. There's probably, I would guess, a lot of people within pharmacy and things like that on Facebook because that's where a lot of conversations are taking place. But no, I've never seen something that's like really good research on the statistical parts of it. In terms of the LinkedIn question, it says LinkedIn has the capability to house articles on its platform. I've always struggled with this one. I've gone back and forth where I've posted them as company articles versus like just long post on LinkedIn. For me, I have always seen the long post perform better. I think the articles are really good, but for some reason, I don't think that they always get as much traction. The one thing I would say about that, though, is LinkedIn has this like 1 to 2 hour window of engagement. So it's like one of these things where if there's a lot of engagement within the first hour of something being posted, it gets elevated up. And one of the things that LinkedIn articles can do is like LinkedIn articles can be sent out via email of like, oh, LinkedIn will be like, here are some trending articles. So that if you can get a lot of engagement within that first hour and you feel that your article has a chance of getting picked up by the larger algorithm and sent and distributed, it's worth it. But it's not a guarantee. In general, I've said like my feeling has always been that the long posts perform better. That's just what I've seen in my experience. But if you can figure out a way, like let's say you're working with a partner company or you have a really good internal employee advocacy program that you could use to push a lot of engagement towards a post within the first hour, it'd be probably better to just do it as a long post versus using it as an article. That's just my general feeling on it. The only other thing I would say that for the articles is that they often become a good repository for people in that they like to look through a larger list of articles. And it's a little easier to look through a kind of all the articles your company has posted versus every single post. So I think it's partially a user experience thing and partially like, do you have the resources to generate a lot of engagement within that first hour in order to get picked up by a larger, by like the LinkedIn algorithm for spreading news. So hopefully that's helpful.
Any other questions? I think we
Awesome.
have time for maybe one more, if anyone has anything. Otherwise, thank you, Sam. That was great. If our attendees want more information, can you remind us again where they can find you?
Yeah, my name is Sam Balter. You can find me on Twitter at SBBalter. If you find me on LinkedIn, if you want a copy of this presentation, if you ever want to talk or have some questions, just feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Great. We will send the full recording this week, so look for that in your inboxes. And thanks again for joining us. Have a great week, everybody. Bye, Sam.
Bye. Thank you.